本集节目由永丰金控冠名赞助，翻转金融，共创美好生活，以新闻开启国际视野，永丰金控与您一同掌握全球脉动。大家好，欢迎收听联合开炮，我是郭崇伦。第二次世界大战结束之后，美国为了要维持全世界的金融秩序，其实设计了很多不同的机制，包括国际货币基金以及用美元作为全世界交易支付的一个重要的一个媒体工具。但是在中国崛起跟第二次世界大战终战80年的今天呢，我们看到其实很多的机制都开始动摇，甚至本身美元的霸权都发生了动摇。那这个时候川普政府希望用一些机制来补强，其实有一个是最引起争议的，就是海湖庄园协议。联合报前些时候针对这些问题独家专访了国际货币体系的权威艾肯格林，请他谈了这些现象跟他的建议。以下是专访内容。Thank you for your time, Professor Eichengreen. First of all, I would like to ask you is U.S. dollars and its role as the world dominant reserve currencies. Do you believe that so far the U.S. dollar still maintains its dominant position as the world reserve currency so far? Is there any challenge to its position right now?
Well, people are worrying about that position going forward, but along many dimensions, the dollar remains the leading, far and away the dominant international and reserve currency, partly because of its historic weight and the depth and liquidity of U.S. financial markets, and partly because of the absence of serious alternatives to the greenback. I would draw a distinction between the dollar as an international currency and the dollar as a reserve currency. So reserve currency status is only one aspect of the dollar's international role. So the dollar is used in cross-border payments. It's used for as a vehicle for international investments, and it's held by central banks and governments as a form of reserves, partly because their own banks and firms use dollars for their cross-border transactions. Central banks want to hold dollars so that they can lend them to those banks and firms in times of need. So reserve currency status is important, but it's only one part of the dollar's international role.
The question why I'm asking is that there's more and more criticisms on the U.S. dollar is used by the U.S. government as a political leverage. What I mean is, for example, the Trump administration during his first term withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal, and that made the European countries very hard to purchase Iranian oil in order to honor its agreement, original agreement. And that is something people have been criticizing for, that the U.S. is not only using the dollar as a neutral, political neutral instrument in the international transaction, but also putting a lot of political purpose in the dollar's function. Do you agree with that criticism at all?
I would observe that the United States has always used international finance and its heavy footprint in international financial markets for diplomatic leverage. So a famous episode would be way back in 1956 when Britain, France, and Israel sought to seize control of the Suez Canal,
Mm-hmm.
and the U.S. told Britain, we will not give you dollars to support the pound sterling unless you withdraw from a military adventure of which we disapprove. So the U.S. always used the dollar as a diplomatic geostrategic weapon. It has been increasing its recourse to financial sanctions, given the way countries around the world use dollars for international payments, rely on the U.S. banking system to make those payments, rely on SWIFT, the messaging system in Brussels, where, again, the U.S. has a lot of influence and control. The U.S. has been using sanctions more frequently. I think in a unstable, potentially hostile world, a country needs to make selective, cautious use of its military sometimes, of its diplomacy sometimes, and of its financial weapons sometimes. I think the fear is that recent U.S. administrations, and Trump in particular, are using the dollar indiscriminately to punish Europeans rather than simply to punish Russia and Mr. Putin. I think more broadly that the main reason other countries are thinking twice about their dependence on the dollar and rethinking the heavy weight of the dollar in their reserve portfolios is not U.S. financial sanctions or weaponization of the dollar. It's simply erratic, unpredictable, counterproductive policies. The role of the dollar had been declining very slowly, even glacially, up until February of 2025. And all of a sudden, lots of people are much more worried and frightened about their dependence on the dollar. That is a Trump 2.0 effect, not this general trend in the direction of weaponizing the dollar.
One of the alternatives that people are talking about is that China's renminbi and also China had both had its economic capacity as well as its intention of using its own financial institution to replace the position of the dollars. Do you think that's even possible? I mean, people talk about renminbi not being able to have transparency, convertibility. How serious is China's economy or its financial intention can really have become an alternative for the position of the dollar?
I think the Chinese renminbi can become a serious rival to the dollar. I just don't know when. I think it will take quite a while before that comes to pass. So China settles half of its own trade using its currency, the renminbi, but only a small fraction of global trade, on the order of 4% of the total, is settled using the currency. China has a cross-border banking platform. It calls it the Cross-Border Interbank Payments System, which it set up as an alternative to CHIPS, the New York International Bank Clearinghouse. But it clears only about, by value, 2% of the transactions that CHIPS clears every day. So the importance of the renminbi is growing, but it is starting out way behind the dollar. The U.S. has been engaged in the process of internationalizing the dollar for more than a century, and China has been at it for at most 15 years. So again, it is starting out way behind. And then there are those questions about transparency, rule of law, if you will. Countries central banks and governments are uncomfortable holding their reserves and relying on the financial system of a country where the politicians, the Politburo, can change the rules of the financial game. So I used to think this worked to the disadvantage of China and the renminbi, and to the great advantage of the United States and the dollar. But now we're asking questions about the rule of law and about the level of comfort of foreign central banks and governments about holding reserves in the United States. So these kind of considerations raise questions about the future of the renminbi, but frankly, they also raise questions about the future of the dollar.
I want to ask you also about President Trump's recent attempt try to incorporate Bitcoin and other major cryptocurrency into American strategic reserve by establishing a so-called the U.S. Digital Asset Reserve. And is this a kind of things that we're going to see all around all the central banks in the world, or is it kind of risky institutional gamble that President Trump is doing? And what kind of impact would this have on the position of the dollar?
So you put the question very politely. I would be less polite and say, this is a crazy initiative on the part of the Trump administration. I would, again, draw a strong distinction between two things. One is a central bank digital currency. The other one is a private cryptocurrency, a privately issued stablecoin like Tether or US dollar coin, or back in the day, Facebook had an idea for a stablecoin that it called Libra. The Trump administration opposes a central bank issued digital currency because it gets campaign contributions and is friendly with the private crypto industry. So I don't think the private crypto industry is going to replace the international role of the dollar because plain vanilla cryptos like Bitcoin are way too volatile to function as money. Stable coins are not always stable, and people will learn the hard way that they can lose value. So I think the only alternative where the future is a central bank issued digital currency. And the current administration is not on board with that. There, the People's Bank of China is the global leader.
I'd like to also ask you about the trade and the tariff negotiation that's been going on. The United States is currently running a large trade deficit with the world. And the White House is saying that they want to reduce the import by pushing for a weaker dollar. And now people are worrying that the Washington may pressure other currency to appreciate in the bilateral tariff negotiation that is going on. Only a few days ago, Asian currency had dramatically increased its value against the dollar. For Taiwan dollars, it had increased over 6.5%. People are worrying that are we going to see a similar kind of Plaza agreement, but on a bilateral basis of 1985 that is coming back again?
So I'm not aware that there have been many serious negotiations so far. There have been a lot of promises that negotiations are coming and that there will be 100 trade deals or packages within 90 days. I'll believe it when I see it. I do think you're right that the Trump administration believes that pushing down the dollar, US dollar, pushing up other currencies, including the Taiwanese dollar, would be good for the United States and help the country reduce its trade or current account deficit. I don't think there would be much of an effect. The current account deficit is the difference between America's investment and America's saving. And it doesn't seem to me that a somewhat weaker dollar or US dollar or stronger Taiwanese dollar would much affect US investment or US saving. So I don't think there would be much of an impact either of an exchange rate change or of a tariff on the trade balance. The one way these things could improve America's trade or current account balance is by crushing investment. If investment came down relative to saving, we would rely less on foreign finance for our investment, and our trade balance and current account balance would strengthen. But that would be disastrous for the growth of the economy. So the Trump administration needs to be careful about what it asks for.
And the second thing, I think a lot of countries, when they are facing with the U.S. Negotiation team, is that about the U.S. sovereign debt. A lot of countries are having the U.S. Treasury bond. And we are seeing this kind of debt have been increasing over the years. What impact could this growing debt burden will have on the U.S., both on Treasury bonds and also on the strength of the dollar? Do you see there's a risk of this leading to a new international financial crisis that is bound to happen?
I see two different kinds of risks. One, if the U.S. continues to run budget deficits of 6 or 7 or 8% of national income, as it's been doing, and looks like it will continue to do because we're going to continue to cut taxes and continue to pretend that we can cut government spending. I think the Congress and the Trump administration are on course to blow up the budget deficit even more. Interest payments on the debt will go up. People will begin to worry about the country and the Fed inflating away the value of the debt. At that point, the dollar does begin to weaken if U.S. inflation picks up. So I do worry about, I've been worried about that scenario for some time, but I've thought the U.S. has some runway ahead of it, 5 or 10 years before that becomes a serious problem, before international investors dump U.S. treasuries. And we do get the kind of crisis that you described. But there's a second risk as well. People in the Trump administration, Trump's Treasury Secretary, Trump's Council of Economic Advisors chair, have other ideas like taxing foreign official holdings of U.S. treasuries, withholding the interest payments on them, or forcibly converting 5 and 10-year treasury bonds into 100-year bonds.
That's the Mar-a-Lago agreement accord that you are referring to, right?
Well, who knows if it's what name? Again, I would call it a crazy accord rather than a Mar-a-Lago accord. But that kind of thing would make international investors, including foreign central banks, think almost any government security would be safer than U.S. Treasury bonds, and that would bring forward in time the crisis that you described.
So is that, I mean, we are facing with the difficult times and a lot of people, even the ordinary people, are worrying about their investment or some of the saving they have. Is that the reason why we are seeing the price of gold have been increasing, or any of the precious metals? Are we going to see a kind of panic that is happening in the 30s in the last century that is leading to a financial crisis?
Well, I do think that gold is traditionally regarded as a safe haven. And in uncertain, highly volatile times like right now, where we have Mr. Trump and we've got geopolitical tensions all over the world, that increases the demand for gold and the price of gold. You asked about the 1930s, and I do worry about a 1930s style scenario We had 3 big banking crises in the United States in the 1930s, in 1930, in 1931, and 1933, as a result of which central banks around the world dumped their dollars because they feared that the banks in which they were being held were not safe, and they didn't know what kind of monetary and exchange rate policies were about to come in the US. The result was there wasn't enough global liquidity. There weren't enough reserves, not only held by central banks, but held by companies and private banks around the world to finance global capital flows like those we'd seen a decade earlier in the 1920s. In addition, I think that liquidity crisis in the 30s was a factor undermining the global trading system, along with the earlier wave of tariffs. So I do worry about a 1930s-like scenario where there's severe downward pressure on global trade and payments. That would not be good for any of us. It would be especially bad for smaller, highly open economies like you-know-who.
We are, this year is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. After the war, there's a lot of international financial institutions like IMF and World Bank, even GATT have been formed to try to mitigate some of the tension that before the war. However, there's a lot of criticism on those international institutions. Some are saying that it's not being representative enough for the emerging economy. Some said that they are inadequate in response to the crisis. What do you think can be done about those international institutions? Do we need another New Bretton Woods conference in order to reform?
I think we have to remember that the perfect should not be the enemy of the good, that these institutions are not perfect, but we're infinitely better off with them than we would be without them. I do think that there are long-standing reasons for reform, for increasing the voice and representation of emerging markets that have a much more powerful voice should have a much more powerful voice in the institutions, commensurate with their role in the global economy. Scaling back the representation of Europe, it tends to be European countries that, for historical reasons, are overrepresented in the IMF and the World Bank. Not so much the United States. It has about the right share of votes and right financial obligations, although it uses its diplomatic power to try to twist their policies a little bit to U.S. advantage. I think the challenge the world will face is how to reform and strengthen these institutions without constructive engagement of the United States. So it was the US that had a leadership role in the Bretton Woods Conference that established the bank and the fund in 1944. There could well be threats by the Trump administration to withdraw from the IMF and the World Bank. Such was a proposal in Project 2025, with Trump administration's blueprint for action this year. It said that the U.S. should withdraw from the two organizations. So the question is, how can the rest of the world reform them and strengthen them, even if the U.S. is not a constructive participant? I think like-minded countries should start right now to talk with one another about how they might go about that process.
Finally, I would like to ask you about your impression on Taiwan. Have you ever visited Taiwan? And what kind of I mean, in Taiwan, we are facing with a pretty dire situation. We are facing with the threat coming from China. We are also an open economy that is being we are in the middle of this turbulence of the world economic crisis, and how should Taiwan do? We may be good in some of the technology, for instance, TSMC, but is there any suggestion you would make for Taiwan?
So I've only changed planes in Taipei once. I was on a flight where someone had a medical emergency. We were diverted, and I ended up changing planes on my way from San Francisco to Tokyo as a result. But here at the University of California, Berkeley, we have quite a number of students who come from Taiwan, and I have learned about the country from research projects that I've helped to guide, undertaken by those students. I get the impression of highly educated, disciplined society with a deep commitment to democracy that has transformed itself fundamentally, modernized itself fundamentally, economically and socially in the course of a couple of generations. So I think there is a lot to admire, and it's above my pay grade to give advice to a country where I've never spent time. My impression is that Taiwan is trying to navigate its difficult place in the world where it's too close to China and too far away from the United States. It seems to be navigating pretty much as well as it can. It needs to remain diversified and try to, as best it can, continue to be engaged and do business with both large economies. And I hope that both large economies will permit Taiwan, won't force Taiwan to, choose between us and them, which would be the worst of all worlds.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Eichengreen, for your time and for your insight. Appreciate it, and hope you can visit Taiwan someday.
Anything you can do to make it happen is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
上网搜寻 VIP.UDN.com 到联合报数位版，看更多精彩的报道。